Sangye
Chula Soki Cholam La Chachu Badu Dagi Cheche Gebe Sonangi Tola Penche Sangye
Sangye
Chula Soki Cholam La Chachu Badu Dagi Kyasuji Dagi Cheche Gebe Sonangi Tola Penche Sangye Chula Soki Cholam La Chachu Badu Dagi Kyasuji Dagi Cheche Gebe Sonangi Tola Penche Sangye
Lojong Tsikin, da kanji shuya res. Dinsa, da kunu di kanji chukure sina, simje tamje ki cheti chela ji kaje ji di simje tamje pendik tupins kan dunge seya da pendik tuya ki chitu sanji tupins da di chitu ane kana subre cheti sen bata chenju sim sambutu diku da di jidan lojung koran diri chenju sim jungre de lojung dikde chenju sim jung ni da shinyamji kukune lojung yadri da zut lojung seti da dini samazi mashikurane diri da chenju sim jung tambare.
So the topic is the adverses of mind training, adverses of training the mind by Geshe Langri Thangpa, and this verse is actually his own hard practice. And so this is going to be the topic for this evening. And before we go through the teachings, the importance of generating the right motivation, and here we should motivate ourselves in such a way that I'm going to listen to the teachings in order to benefit sentient beings by removing their sufferings and by giving rise to well-being and happiness. And the way to do that is basically by achieving the state of enlightenment. So therefore, we generate the motivation to gain the state of enlightenment, to be able to help other sentient beings to give rise to happiness and to eliminate their sufferings. And this is basically another way of saying, generation of bodhicitta. And this is really the bodhicitta intention. The bodhicitta intention or generation of bodhicitta intention is nothing but to generate the wish to gain the state of enlightenment for other sentient beings. And also, when we do this in the beginning, we actually realize that the real subject matter of this adverses is also bodhicitta itself. And we call it training the mind in giving rise to bodhicitta. And of the true tradition, this is basically training in giving rise to bodhicitta through the tradition of exchanging oneself with others. Dakshin Nyamje.
Chikche tambuti dagi tati dani simje tamjela singi yari dagi simje tamjela je jeja jamshe tindi ngari pejo yagri da yinsa da dani simje tamjela singi da lo jungmapo kishi la lungru tamba dani simje tamjela ishi nobele habes da miyu simje tamjela ni ishi nobele habes da ishi nobele digita nan jitena chebe na da segune ne chindigi segune ne la soba kandu ji ishi nobele tene jungare sigere da jungwe yarba tinsa 다 단지 되는 전에 이신 넘으세요. 기타 시작. 초득이 버치지게 봐. 다 semje thamje de dile thabare si shignu gulela karasene chiti tiki de semje thamje semje le tene chunari ne chime ngundu kubanti semje le tene chunari tharbe kubanti semje le tene chunari thamje kimbe kubanti semje le tene tuba yinsa 아니 이신의 불렐하베스 다 전초주에 삼바이스 네 그래서네 전초디 근데 먼저 고와다 탈바다 탐지킨다 디나네 탐지킨다 고와 초디 아니 이식은 그래서 신절 되는 중앙에서 전초주에 삼바이스 다지죠 진리게 삼바 그래서 삼백원에 아니 다도 뒤다도 심지어 진리제 번좀 보시고 단들이 지금된다.
So then we go through the first verse, and the first verse says right in the beginning, in the Tibetan, I will learn to hold them supremely dear. That comes in the first, in the Tibetan kind of sentence structure, the order of the sentence structure. And there are two ways of actually, two versions. One version actually says Dak Ni, means basically emphasis, I, that is Vishnanatamba himself. But the other version actually says Dak Ki, which is basically third case particle, which is basically genitive case particle, which is basically showing or revealing Langritangpa himself as basically the agent here. So there are two versions to that, which basically there's no real difference in meaning. To all sentient beings, this is what really the Tibetan says. So therefore, the recipient of your action, in terms of, again, grammar, is all sentient beings. So all sentient beings are actually here described as more precious and more supreme than a wish-fulfilling or wish-granting jewel. And the idea is that, if you have a wish-granting jewel, and if you pray to that, then you will, all your mundane necessities and all your mundane wishes will be fulfilled, whether you are seeking wealth or food or clothing, whatever mundane kind of wishes that you have will be fulfilled if you have a wish-granting jewel or wish-fulfilling jewel. And so here, sentient beings are actually described as surpassing even the wish-granting jewel. And the reason for that is because even though the wish-fulfilling jewel is able to satisfy one's mundane kind of needs, worldly needs, it is because of depending on sentient beings that one is actually able to achieve well-being and happiness in this lifetime. It is because of sentient beings that one is actually able to achieve the state of higher rebirth in the next lifetimes. And it's ultimately it is because of sentient beings that one is actually able to achieve the ultimate state of enlightenment. So because of that, sentient beings are able to do something, give rise to something within us that we cannot do simply by relying on a wish-fulfilling jewel. So that's why in the beginning it says, sentient beings are actually more precious, more supremely precious than a wish-granting jewel. And because of that, in order to benefit these supremely precious sentient beings, I'm going to give rise to a determination to achieve the highest well-being for them. And the highest well-being here is basically the state of enlightenment. So basically generating the determination to seek the state of enlightenment for all other sentient beings.
디 자와 전주스 용계 부탁된다. 초도도 인지다. 이름에 대이실. 다 근제 남의 전주 산지 주고만 뒤부터는 디 자와 전주 무슨 공부했어. 아니 인지 senje 탐제라. 이게 인지 초도도 인지다스. senje는 인지 공부했어. 아니 뉴스에 베이시 동바 돈이도 베이시 공부를 했지. 어디에서 다 선제를 가르쳐 그랬다. 선제 제번 진구대 시계를다. 제 선제 제번 마수나 상기 주고만 들어야 말이지. 상기 주고만 대 가르쳐는 저 산지 주고 가지고라 아니 전주고 심지 전주고 심지 자와디 인지리스 더 근제 자와 인지 투베 차니 인지 심절이 되는 기고 그래봐 아니 전주고 심데 심절이 되는 기고 그래 가르세나 가르수 그래 미 심제기 강에서 더 어두게 치다 상기 주고가 전등이를 넣을 전주고 심시게 제산 띵이산이 심제기 되기 가서 강에서 더 어두게 치다 전주고 심기 그래 자서 깨고 그래 봐 띵이산이 전주고 심기 벌라 아니 심제 집을 진버티 내는 전주고 심기 하면 그래 어디에서 다 심제를 했더니 이신노블 레라베 든저 전적도 삼바 있다 제번 좀 쇼세디 심제를 따도 제번 좀 진지 세디 지도 장바도 제 권이 장구였지 대화도 되는 지마르는 바다 강에도 되는 동에도 되는 지마르는 세디 냐별로 들렸다 진지시게 제사 따도 제번 좀 진지로 세디 장바도 인지 이남단 제니 거리 진지세디 어디에서 제번 진주디 내가 되는 지마로 대화도 되는 지마로 로질의 진지시게
On the same topic, Nagarjuna mentions that in order to achieve the state of enlightenment, one has to give rise to a mountain like bodhicitta and compassion that is without any discrimination, without any kind of limitations, compassion that is extensive. And then also one has to give rise to the non-dual wisdom, and the non-dual wisdom or wisdom of non-duality here refers to the wisdom realizing emptiness. So therefore, Nagarjuna also mentions, the factors that are responsible for giving rise to the state of enlightenment, which one of them is basically bodhicitta. Bodhicitta in turn is dependent on compassion. And so in this sense, then, it is very clear that one's enlightenment, whether one achieves the state of enlightenment or not, is dependent on sentient beings, because ultimately whether one achieves the state of enlightenment or not is dependent on whether one gives rise to bodhicitta, and bodhicitta is actually induced or cultivated depending on other sentient beings, because the root of bodhicitta is compassion. And when you talk about compassion is basically compassion of having sentient beings as the objects or recipient of your compassion. So when we have compassion, the focus is basically sentient beings. So therefore, without sentient beings, we cannot give rise to compassion, and without giving rise to compassion, we cannot give rise to bodhicitta, and so therefore, without bodhicitta, we cannot give rise to the state of enlightenment. So therefore, in this sense, then we realize that even our state of enlightenment is dependent on other sentient beings, and so therefore, that ultimately it is very important to be able to actually hold sentient beings as supremely dear, because without actually seeing sentient beings as precious and supremely dear in that positive light, it is impossible to give rise to compassion. And without compassion, as I mentioned earlier, it is impossible to give rise to bodhicitta. So therefore, in the first verse, the prayer is basically that that one may actually be able to hold all sentient beings as supremely dear. So he says, I will train myself to hold them as supremely dear. And the way in which actually one holds sentient beings as supremely dear is through the dual practice of love and compassion. So love is basically wish that sentient beings may have happiness, and compassion is the wish that sentient beings may gain freedom from their suffering. So when we have two of these things, loving kindness and compassion, then that is how we actually hold sentient beings as.
tene gombolo to be any tando janju chota tumbe chunam guni chidar semje namis janju chota tumbe any chunam beauty colors and semje is jasane karasure tin san zobe janju toben doing egi doing doina semje de lamana shi kubres jasa Teacher Zobe Chanju Devaye, Semjan and the Lama Shinto Tas, on the Semjeti Rang Lama Tibu Kadichigir, Sanjel Tibu Kadichigir, Tinashi, Semjel Tibu Chigurs. Otisumbre.
Nagarjuna mentioned on the same topic that the cause or the causal factor for all practices gearing towards the state of enlightenment, gearing towards bodhicitta and state of enlightenment, is sentient beings. Sentient beings is the primary factor. And because of that, for those, Nagarjuna continues, those who wanted to seek the perfect state of enlightenment, they should revere and respect sentient beings as one respect one's gurus, as one respect Buddhas and enlightened beings.
Katambi Kishi Jengnawe Jitemba Nam Semje Le Sangye Chebanzins. Jitemba Nam Ki Semje Le Sangye Chebanzins. August Tachi Churchiniti Sangi Jukova Tunding Kansa Tibi Karachiburesina. August Telendoti Sangye Le Semje Chebanzins. Tiku Jankaresina Sangye Le Ani. Maybe Magubala Sobatis Jawa Sigmaris Jawa Duko Kumbrua. Then Simjeti Pamaris, Pamanis and Marshi Jinji Marshis Jawa Toman and Machia Mati Nima end up to Macheva. Mati need Chevenegus. Jinkandi Jang Mashi Jinji Jin Sugilo Tikis touching Karasura Machiringi Ani Simjagi Tigi Karasuga Rangiso Mambukaviari Ani Tani Mambuse Yaris Dawa Mambutu Yaris what did it in this Jeans, but Jinsus, the land of Jilla, and it got a super Jinsun to be Jindus, Jinsun to Jinsubu Kipures, and a teacher would ace it. And under Karasina, Sangel Lesson Jepe Jebanzin Ketchua Jibris. Sangel Matebala Sobatusuki Kavarba, Deva Yaraba. In a task, Maguba Kesati, Sassimjel Kigierba, Chikarchini, Odinsa, Telepe, Ketchum Jenny Tichuris, Tindisunduga.
Also, another great Kadamba Geshe Changawa mentions or advises that ordinary beings, that is basically mundane beings, regard enlightened beings or Buddhas as more important and more precious than sentient beings. But as practitioners, Geshe Changawa advises us, as practitioners, that we should actually reverse this and actually consider sentient beings as more important than enlightened beings. Sentient beings as more important than Buddhas. And the reason for that is because it is exceptionally rare that we generate irreverence or disrespect towards enlightened beings. But occasions when we actually disrespect sentient beings is much more. And because of that, as practitioners, as Dharma practitioners, Geshe Changawa, the Kadamba master, advises us that we should actually train ourselves so that we actually regard or treat sentient beings as more important than Buddhas, and and the way to do that is basically through the training of actually seeing sentient beings as having been one's mothers, and not one time but many times in different lifetimes, and then also actually remembering the kindness of mothers during those times, through meditation, of how as mothers sentient beings have given life to us, protected our lives, eliminated our obstacles and sufferings, has given rise to a lot of benefits, as we can actually learn from or understand from one of the mother of this present lifetime. And so through dwelling on these different kindness of the mothers, then generate the wish to repay the kindness of the mothers and human beings. So through this practice, then we learn how to basically revere and respect sentient beings as more important than enlightened beings. So this is a significant point of practice, because as practitioners, it is quite rare that we may actually generate disrespect and irreverence towards enlightened beings or Buddhas, but it is very much the case that we generate disrespect for sentient beings. So therefore, in order to eliminate this point of mistake in our practice, then Geshe Jangapa says that we should reverse this ordinary worldly way of doing by actually treating sentient beings as more important than enlightened beings.
Tine that tine lojong tine na yari ni ngamba chigi ani chi simje ji tiri ta kyang ni pugu khobana na li ni chi ani tiri ta kyang ni tiri ta di ni karasore Quran pugu di tadi Chukana ni tat, chuni, iti takin ni tat, chukatiri ni regiyar badin. Ani Kuranti pati chini ni purutila chui chiyong kani chila chikab. Ani Kuran jeshi bari siktuba. Ani ngambati Kuranti karasati ritag chawatila teni Kuranti. Ani sambarat chulu ku. Ani chi Rita Kiviatu Sha Chabri Siktuba, Tinde Yerba, that Chosungi Tinde Zawati Yerba, Zawatinde Yerta Kanjat Pamala, Pulia Zawatinde Yerba, or Tinsa, Tindegit, and Pamagi, Lemon Buche Yerba, Zawati, Lemon Bujang Sherba, what Jasa Tusutengu Greece, Samjet Hamje Rambi Macheb.
To illustrate the intensity of the kindness of one's mother, usually this story is told that one time there was a hunter, and the hunter was chasing a pregnant deer, and then it is said that as he was chasing the pregnant deer and he shot the deer, the baby actually he gave birth to the baby kind of fell, and then what happened was as she was running, the mother deer, she turned around and she was dying, but then she turned around, she came back to her young one, and then she kind of licked her one last time, and that scene actually moved the hunter so much, it is said that in the story, that became the factor for that hunter to actually induce or to give rise to compassion and to live the life of a hunter, and then to actually engage in the practice of Dharma. So that actually, that scene became the causal factor for that hunter to be moved by compassion. So therefore, this is really the example of how even animals have that intensity of compassion, that intensity of kindness towards one's young ones, and so much the case with respect to human beings. And so therefore, we have to actually understand that this intensity of compassion and the way in which one's mother has nurtured us is not just one time, but many times over in different lifetimes. So that's how basically how we should train ourselves to actually see the kindness of one's mother sentient beings.
Dene kesa shiwala junju dala simje namda gyawales sangye chudu drawalas simje dan sangye nyibuti sangye gi chu zobes karesube sangye ju kobanti kuni niga drawales sangye chudu drawalas gyala guja 대신 대신도 신제라미 지주 자로 그거 제반나신 신제를 그거는 지도 지주 가르레스 어디에서 상계주 상계국 그만들야는 신제다 상계니부티 아니 상계주 그만들야라 아니가 매든 이런 거지 자와레스 주도 이내야 아니 자와를 그거 제 차제 쳐바제 아니지 가리는 지게가 디는 시심젤이 지금 스티치 추스는
So again, in Shantideva's Bodhisattva's way of life, Shantideva cautions us, as to why is this the case, that even though in terms of being a causal factor for one's enlightenment, that sentient beings and enlightened beings play equal role in the sense that they are equally powerful factors to give rise to enlightenment, sentient beings and enlightened beings. Why it is the case that we respect Buddhas or enlightened beings and we don't respect sentient beings? So therefore, Shantideva actually asks this caution to us, and why this is the case, why this discrimination, when really the case is that both of them are equal factors to give rise to enlightenment.
상계라니 대바제 쳐바제 아니 그래서 그래 차도 쳐바제 조사지기여봐 디나시 아니 델레테네 상기 주고 가도 비여봐 디나시 심절레테네 베나 상기 주고 가도 가라 니 베나 진바지단에 심절레테네 땅 tené chutim chi sune migi chubung chutim sune soju pung ya ti simjel tené pung ku yare majin ba me ya ti simjel tené pung ku yare ane me tamba choba ne chu chama chi ju do su gi shi ti simjel tené sun chutim chi sune ani simjel tené sun ku yare ane soba ti sane ani soba tené chamba inji chanju de sem otusu takanje sangi gi ni zuwa tusu semjele tené tu ni ti sa karasure sangi ta semje ni buti sangi gi chutu bala sangi ko kwantu bala ni 니가 개친부인 것도 집버리 어디리 개친다도 들어봤다.
So sentient beings and enlightened beings are equal in that they become equally important causal factors for our enlightenment, because by depending on enlightened beings or Buddhas, we engage in making offerings, doing prostrations, cultivating devotion, compassion, and devotion. And also they become source of our merit accumulation through making offerings and so forth. And this is how enlightened beings become causal factor for enlightenment. And like that, with respect to sentient beings, they also become causal factors for giving rise to one's own enlightenment. Because if you look at all the major factors that give rise to the state of enlightenment, they are possible. These, we are able to actually engage in all of these major factors, their practices, simply because of their being sentient beings. For example, if you look at practice of generosity, generosity is possible only when they are sentient beings. And likewise, observance of morality. For example, refraining from the 10 non-virtuous actions, of refraining from killing, that is dependent on there being sentient beings, that observance of morality. We cannot actually refrain from killing and engage in that virtue if there are no sentient beings. Likewise, we talk about refraining from stealing or refraining from lying or refraining from engaging in divisive speech. All of these are possible when there are sentient beings. And likewise, the practice of patience and forgiveness, practice of loving kindness, practice of compassion, practice of bodhicitta, all of these major causal factors of enlightenment can only be practiced when there are sentient beings. So it is possible because of there being sentient beings. So this is how, and sentient beings become equally important factors to give rise to the state of one's own enlightenment.
심제 구제 마도 상기 기베 탑시면서 심제 고래 맞지는 상기 기베 탑면서 상기 지금 심제는 상기 기베 탑됐다 심제 뭐죠 심제 고래 맞지는 상기 기베 탑면서 상기를 쳐봐피 가르제니 파주대 심제를 저와 매버제 가르수그레 진지 매버제 지 가리네제 아니 조조되는 상계를 쳐버피 제네야 쳐버서야 돼 상계 쳐버서야 문제 있는 시도와 개발시도와 투 개발을 쓰기 위해서다 자산 쳐버 제대다 지금부터 쳐버 제를 봐 쳐버 때문에 상계 두 개발들이 어디에서 심지어 그거 맞잖아. 가르치는 심지어 상계 기업의 탑이야 말이지. 심지어 구제 맞지. 마도 상계 기업의 탑이면서 어디에서 그래서 심지어를 진지 지금 어디지 구제 그것도 좋아. 제너스다 상계기기 그래서는 상계 정부 투기에 대해서 이제 강의 지세야지 투기 봐. 아도 계집장에 숨도 조사해야 돼. 심지어 그 강의 세야지 조사. 네 상계 고관들에 대해서 이제 좀 그걸 봐. 어째 인상 상계를 단 심지어기 강의를 시야도 미슈메 그래서. 뒤에서 심지어기 강의들 강에 마세버제 심지어 강에 때야 비치 저거까지 제수니 네 상기계에 탐내 임프레스.
And also it is mentioned that there is no other means of pleasing enlightened beings or pleasing Buddhas other than pleasing sentient beings. In other words, the only way to please Buddhas and enlightened beings is basically to please sentient beings. And so basically that what it means is that if we engage in making offerings to the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas on the one hand, and on the other hand we have no compassion and feeling and empathy and so forth whatsoever towards sentient beings, then that kind of offering to the Buddhas in the absence of compassion and empathy for sentient beings does not actually please enlightened beings. And so therefore the Sanskrit term for homage is basically puja. To pay homage is is puja, and puja really means to please or to praise, and the only way to please or praise the Buddhas is basically by pleasing sentient beings through practice of loving kindness and compassion. And why this is the case? Why this is the case that the only way in which one can actually please enlightened beings, the only way in which one can actually pay homage to enlightened beings is by pleasing sentient beings. Why this is the case is because if you look at the mechanism of enlightenment, the whole process, then we realize that in the beginning, when the Buddhas first generated this thought of enlightenment, the bodhicitta, they generated it for other sentient beings to eliminate the suffering of other sentient beings. And then in the interim, when they engaged in the accumulation of merits for 3 countless eons, in order to gain the state of enlightenment, they did that precisely to give rise to happiness in sentient beings and to eliminate suffering. And then in the end, when they ultimately gain the state of enlightenment, the very purpose of gaining the state of enlightenment is to achieve, to be able to benefit other sentient beings, to be able to help sentient beings achieve the state of enlightenment themselves. So therefore, we see that in the beginning, in the interim period, and ultimately to the stage of enlightenment, the sole intention of the Buddhas and enlightened or enlightened beings is basically to benefit other sentient beings. So that's why the only way in which one can actually please the enlightened beings is basically by pleasing the sentient beings. That's the reason why.
아니 제서 감부문에 뒤숨그리 나게 정규 쇼장기 그에 로방 마드버스 나게 정규 쇼장기 스티베 나게 다 정규 쇼바에 다 간지 나게 되기 나게기 로방 마드버 지금 나게 맞춰지 심절이야 나게 세티다 지대로 온게 심 킴바스게르다 이제 나게 다 간지 나게가 온게 심야 심 토부 맞지버지 로바 마드버스 심제 20 노분은 그베 지우로 농시 농시 심지어 20 노분은 그베 지우로 농시 다 단데디 들렸다 심지어 20 노분을 배자도가 단지디 20 노분을 합바스 제버바 다리디 20 노분스 다 20 노분디 지 천디기 디기 관계 20 노분을 소화하는 연구지 시게르바 디나시 지 심제디 디지털지 대원 중선 20노분 날씨를 지금까지 디스기 부자다 심제 20노분은 급여 지원을 제사 심제의 급여 제국의 순도가.
So again in another text treatise on bodhisattva activities or deeds, it is mentioned that it is taught that one should not be puffed with ego, very much like kind of a fly, flipping its wings as if being puffed by ego, and that's the kind of analogy. And so instead of doing that, we should actually cultivate humility and respect towards sentient beings who are like wish-granting jewels. And in the first, of course, in our first verse from the 8 verses on mind training, sentient beings are actually described as being more precious than wish-fulfilling jewels. But here in this particular text, sentient beings are actually referred to as wish-fulfilling jewels. And so basically, what is mentioned, what is taught here is basically the need to reduce one's ego and cultivate humility and respect towards other sentient beings.
직장인이버디 강도 수단 프로그레치 다니 군레 멘다신 셴라 삼바타바 쪽 좀 shows that is 직장인이버디스.
And now we go to the second verse, and the second verse reads, "Whenever I associate with others, I will learn to think of myself as the lowest among all, and respectfully hold others to be supreme from the very depths of my heart."
로 종합부 지 로종진이 됐어. 안도스야디 Lojong Abu Kansaran, Sajo Ganda, Yu Ganda, Donin, Sajo Ganda, Yu Ganda, and drove G Toa Mawan, Dima Suda Drobe, and tiny Gun Mentashi, Rani, Karasa, Mebretani, Shenda Chodo, Jevans and Bashos, and
The second line basically says that whenever one associate with others, and the one here really refers to the practitioner, the mind training practitioner. Whenever that mind training practitioner goes about and associate with others, then one should train in such a way that whether the status of one's friends may be high or low, irrespective of that, one should actually train in such a way that one actually sees oneself as being lower than others, and not that, and then train to actually hold others to be higher or supreme, and that too, not just as a kind of a lip service, but from the bottom of one's heart. So this is what is mentioned here.
Oh, just Karasure, Domrimbuchi, and Karasure, Nike Kungula, and Dekichum, Chas. Just Rangi in Deka, Juan, the Shanatin, Juan Janja, Rangi, Rani in Deka, Yeva. Rala Tiki Kan Yeva, Tosukanga, Shanatin Juma Shata Imbre. Things are a Karasure, Shang la Gubachaburis, Shingi in the Lakuba, Machu Kebachune, Lilia Gubachaburis, Makeba, Genetic, Lavasunki in Denta, Jigin the Tusieva. Kubache Kubiyarvati Chukuba Pena and Chi Makevers Juni Ching Jamboros Mani Chuni Chilkubachi Kubir Kanche Chesa Mike Machi Kubache Kubris Chesa Tikarere Chesuka Kanto Sunda Travis Tiny Kun Metash Shana Chotan by Tatu Chivatin Bashoseti. Karasena Rangi in the Kanjuma, Tiki Kanjuma, Tuskangulo, Shalatin Junarba. Oh, the Nandita Tiki Kariane, Mara Karasa Ranla Tande Tenjo Bichu to get in the Juniati Mar Chimbatan shooting soon Sevacum or Tindetel Junarba T Chesakanga Shanatinirba Chimbatan Sashanri shooting soon at the Shire Sevacum Sati Shanriba. Any Tintili Jerry in the Tindigi Niji. Longju Karini Seg name country nation attention Yerba. And Chime Tiki Kandijini Chime want to sing it, want to let me go once at the Shanatin to get it. And the Tabak was at the Shanatin Sanji Jukuvanti Shanatin. But the Santa Nicarasuri. Oh, to show some Tani Kuni Mentash, Membatani. Chot, Shanta Chot. She was that in the man. Chesan, what the chip we have presented, Rami in the Kanayavati, Sindigi in the Kanayava. Chima Junjugi in the Kanyava. tiki kanyi batus kangas shana tani chungu biyarwa. O tin yisanta tindi chebu reis, rani masa sun reis, ram masa sunna yunde kanga yungu biyarwas. Ngage ju kungula yunde ki chungi chas. Ji rana shenda le laa zirwa ji yin sambarwa chigina, shenga yunde di tsugun goyo kabo yungu. Ji shana rana jik di jebina, shana goba ma jebina, ko shenga yunde di yunga la ji rawarab ji jogurwa. Ko ngage di chimpu jina ni shana di jingi rawa di jigmarwa. Ta ganje wate diri ta
Also, the great Kadamba master Domdun Jeve Jungne mentioned that in the context of seeing oneself as lower and others as higher, or in the context of this mind training practice, Domdun Jeve Jungne mentioned that on the boulder of ego, the water of qualities will not settle. So basically, the water is like inner qualities, and the boulder is like an ego. If on a boulder, the water will not settle down. So very much like that, on the boulder of ego, the water of qualities will not settle down. And so therefore, because of that, we have to actually train ourselves in such a way that one actually cultivate humility, one actually see the qualities of others, and therefore based on that we actually cultivate humility. And the way in which we can do this through mind training is by actually seeing that all the qualities that one possesses, including one's own kind of life as a human person, having all the leisure and enjoyments that comes with it, all of that is because of kindness of other sentient beings. And so because of that, then we should train our mind in such a way that we are able to actually cultivate such a degree of humility that we can actually see every other sentient beings as higher than oneself, having better qualities. And of course, if we come across with somebody who is higher than oneself in terms of qualities pertaining to the three trainings, training in morality, training in concentration, and training in wisdom, of course, it is much easier. But even if we come across with someone who has the sole quality of speaking gently, without actually meaning anything, kind of pleasing words, even then we should be able to actually see the inherent qualities in that person. And only then, we are able to actually learn something from that person. Rinpoche says that if we actually don't cultivate this degree of humility, if we actually see oneself as superior, then what happens is that we are not going to relate with that person, and if we don't relate with that person, we will never, gain the qualities that person has, that person might have. And so in the process, we actually fail to learn. We don't actually, we are not able to cultivate qualities because of our ego when we don't have this basic humility. And so the mind training way of cultivating humility so that one actually see others as better, others as having qualities, is actually to realize that whether it is one's own education or qualities, or whether it is like one's own happiness in this lifetime, it is possible only because of there being other sentient beings. And so if you look at this present life, the fact that we have attained to human birth with all the leisure and opportunities, is because of the fact that we have cultivated, we have practiced generosity in our past lifetime, because we have actually practiced observance of moral ethics or morality in the past lifetime, and it is because of the fact that we have practiced patience and so forth. But we see that with respect to all of these practices, whether it is generosity or compassion, patience or morality, it is only possible to engage in these practices when there are other sentient beings. So in other words, it is possible because of depending on other sentient beings. And so therefore, in all the three times, it is like that, and also in the future lifetimes, whether we wanted to achieve rebirth in higher realms, or whether we wanted to achieve the state of liberation, or whether we wanted to achieve the state of perfect enlightenment, it is possible to achieve all of these three, things only because of there being other sentient beings. Because all the practices that are involved with respect to, all of these, states of realizations is possible because of there being other sentient beings, as I mentioned earlier. And so, because of that, Geshe Nagri Tangpa actually explains this mind training of cultivating humility in a form of a prayer, by praying that that he may be actually able to respectively hold others to be supreme, and to think of oneself as lowest of all. And so this is possible only when we actually look at how all our qualities and happiness in the three times, in the past, in the present, and the future, can only come about because of there being other sentient beings. And if we cultivate such a degree of humility, then it is possible for us to actually give rise to inner qualities and increase our inner qualities because of that.
Lasam tu dole te ne karsu. Yenden de na nagi na never is. Paru dagi gyon la tani jas. Tani kebar pashi dajoji. Denyum tu ni simgi mijo. Dene paru dagi gyon la dagi yamaris. 다니 개발 파시스 아니 나 다니 개발 파시 다초스 개발 파바이 다초인 삼을 지야르바디 그기나스 대념도니 심기미 자우스 아니 잔디 파미는 인기 자와디 자바시기 다디 나게세디 랑기 출렁아 계지야 지르바 랑기 출렁미베 아니 나이길 때 잡아시기 자디 방이 kunci 자와 인스다 네 예바 kunci 자와 딩버리 다 방이 그래서 잡아셔야 돼 아니 어디서 자디 방이 자와 인스 제선다 제선 시안을 라인이 마버스 시안을 초도 제 중고야 비전티티 안티마제베제 라초디 초인 선버지 나게체나 네 밤이 근지 자인 스타디 밤에 구승기 예바 강걸로 밤에서 들어봐 무슨 바이오스는 무슨 예주면 도바지에들 바이오스냐 시신도 전부터 시신을 때는 무슨 예주를 또 돈바들 바이오스냐 또 밤에서 무슨 예주고 줘 로야들 밤에서 여봐 제가 잡아디 밤에 근지 자인 자디 밤에 근지 자인 잡았어요 어디 인san 나게디 어떤 인san이 그거처럼 버릇이 규정되지.
In this sudra called Sudra instigating one to train in determined practice, it is said that one should actually remain in the forest and in solitude, and one should train in such a way that one do not actually seek or find or search for faults in others, and also one should not actually consider oneself as being superior or better than others, and so in this way cultivate humility. And the reason for that is it is mentioned in the same sutra that that pride and ego is basically the primary causal factor of lack of conscientiousness. palmeba, lack of conscientiousness, and it is because of lack of conscientiousness that one actually engages in all the negative actions through the three doors: body, speech, and mind. So pride and ego is actually identified here as basically the causal factor which prevents us from cultivating conscientiousness and conscientious behavior or action. And conscientious action basically refers to the practice of observing, guarding one's body, speech, and mind through practice of mindfulness and vigilance. And so when we engage in the practice of mindfulness, vigilance, and through that way one guards one's actions of body, speech, and mind, that is how we actually cultivate conscientiousness. And lack of conscientiousness is what is really responsible for, engaging in all the negative actions of body, speech, and mind. And the primary factor for that is whenever we entertain notions of oneself being superior than others. In other words, whenever we induce pride and ego, that is the sole factor that robs us of this mental conscientiousness.
지제 숨바디 결함군도 랑귤라 도지 너무 게마타 다시 말은 집에는 전달권 되는 오버쇼스 어디리.
So then we go to the third verse, and the third verse reads, "In all actions I will learn to search into my mind, and as soon as an afflictive emotion arises, endangering myself and others, will firmly face it and avert it."
다티 가르스나 전함 군두스 전함 때 전함남 시스들 로아 두바 녀와 니 차바 심부터 전함남 시스야디 간제기 전에야 두두 임버리 두두 니두 네 전함남 시 간제기 전에야 랑기 샘르다기 되게 제거레스 랑 전함 군도랑 그 따지스 다 너무 깨마타스 너무 지기도나 샘마로 지기도나 대마타 아니 젠더 돈은 도바쇼스 다 방도 도주를 지중소는 남산티 지그려 봐 방도 도주를 지중소는 남산 도바 지그려 봐 디나시 너무 깨마타 아니 다시 말은 집에나 젠더 돈은 아니 너무 지게서는 라마로 지그리 셰마로 지그리 아니 어디 지그리 자서 게마타도 아니 배 젠더분은 또 젠더스는 가수래 더 근제 방도 두두 수완나시 더 받지 그랬어 어디 너무 뒤뒤 뭐지지 남산고는 받지 그랬어.
So then the third verse says, "In all actions," in all actions means basically in all modes of being, whether one is actually walking or sitting or lying down on bed, and any other kind of activities one is engaging in. At all times, one should actually search one's mind. Basically means one should guard one's mind, one should be vigilant of one's own mental activities, and then as soon as through this mental vigilance and mindfulness, as soon as one finds the rising of afflictive emotions, then understanding that these negative emotions endanger oneself and others, one should firmly and forcefully avert it. And firmly and forcefully is the Tibetan word chantap, means basically forcefully, right then and there, without any kind of procrastination and things like that. Very much like if a poisonous snake lands on one's lap, one wouldn't actually waste one's time. One should just, one would like throw it away immediately and forcefully right then and there. So very much like that is jantap, is which as soon as one actually sees the rising of negative emotions, seeing that it actually endangers oneself and others, one should forcefully and firmly face it and avoid it.
다지 지주 전부 그 도티견에 숨버다 묘모기니 다좀 심제 좀 수준 좀 묘모방이 가르치 그래서 팔고 전도 남산도 붙이고 해도 그랬으니 란좀 받지 그래 라마르원 지그리 봐 아니 라마르원 제봤던 셰마르원 지그리스 아니 수준 좀 받지 그랬어 딱 이제 아니 묘모 받기께서나 아니 다강을 잡아있는 융합이 저항에 발을 주고 봐 아니 융합이 저항에 발을 주는 때는 미리 주고 수정돼 아니 소치 봐 마지막 시야다 융합이 저항에 가르쳐서는 수정님 그래 그래서 묘목이 레거티 가서 란좀이야 시엔좀이야 수정님이 좀 버지야 드리스 그래서 게만다 도버지고 리셋 드리.
So why this is the case that one should forcefully avert as soon as one finds afflictive emotions rising is because, as it is again explained by Maitreya Buddha in his Ornament of Scriptural Knowledge. But again, he says that because of the fact that it is negative emotions that destroy oneself, it is negative emotions that destroy others, and it is also negative emotions that destroy one's morality or moral ethical observance. For example, when it is because of intense negative emotion that one may actually engage in any of the 10 non-virtuous actions, for example, killing somebody or stealing something. And so as soon as that happens, then that negative emotion has destroyed one's moral observance or morality. So that's why Maitreya Buddha says that because of these reasons that one should forcefully avert and eliminate negative emotions as and when they arise. The fact that they destroy oneself, that they destroy others, and that they destroy one's moral discipline.
되네. 계속 시원한 진주 레슨들이 가디 하다 남이 탐제 다기 달랑 장스 대다이기다 나르미기 메나치 중민스 내 하다 미다 탐제 랑기 달랑네양 되게 랑녀를 치투 말이죠. 그러지 그런 수준 붙이되는 딩녀를 치투 다 녀모 다되게 랑녀면 미기는 치부지게 됐다 녀모 되게 치부지게 됐어. 자상 하다 나미남 탐제 다기 달랑자 대다기 다스라니 나면 나르네베스 내나치지 중민스 아니 중민 말이스 묘모 돕지 다디니스 간다 채널에로 그냥 털 양네베 대다 대게지기 대다 데르다스 데르스드 냐메 데 다 깨지기니 도르지 아니 레알하버지는 냐메는 도르지 그랬어 냐모 그다디 어디 바르기 다도수기 지 달랑자라니기지 군대 시험도 마당베체 디지기는다 추기초 다시 그래서 그래 걔네람들은 실두야고 튕길도 두개야 talan sebakun ne sanjing tuwe jule tuwe yarba ta nyemo tigi ane kesu na ane karesu kure ane rangi nyawe mena to kechi chila ane tora chigres jasa nyemo kema tha ti do kuya ti karesu na nyemo thati rang nyawa la chigres nyawa la tor kres jasa nyemo kema ta tashimaru chibe na tanda tanda shos seti ta jujenti.
And to continue this, Shandideva actually explains why one should firmly face and avert and forcefully eliminate rising negative emotions. Shandideva explains that in his Bodhisattva's way of life by saying that even if all the beings in the realm of gods and humans were to arise as one's enemies, and they were to forcefully drag they attempt to forcefully drag one into the uninterrupted hell realm, that if one has the stability of the mind and the control of the mind, they can never drag oneself into the uninterrupted hell realm. On the other hand, if one falls under the prey of negative emotions, then instantaneously, very easily, that negative emotion has the capacity to lead one into the raging fire of hell realms. So this is basically what Shandideva says, and it is the case because even if gods and human beings were actually to become one's enemies, and they try to drag one into the hell realm, through proper training of how to engage in the Dharma practice, it is possible that their animosity can actually become a causal factor for practice of Dharma. For example, their animosity and their negative actions can become a causal factor for the practice of patience, and therefore their animosity and their negative actions can actually become a causal factor for one's own enlightenment. But this is never the case with respect to negative emotions. That when one generates negative emotions, one's own negative emotions can drag easily oneself into the raging fire of hell realms. So this is again, one of the very strong reasons why, as soon as we find negative emotions arising, we should face them and we should forcefully eliminate them.
Chije shibati rashin be simjeni ditu tapin chungsi jite ta cheba shinye barkare je statine rashin be simje se shigani ba kare de namjin shigani ba meti shigani ba chuje se tuba rashin be simje ditu tapin chungsi rashin be simje 가가 전에 신이 됐은지 야 뒤도 잡고 뒤보다 동네 뒤벨에 잡지 중에 참이 나죠 중에 뒤바세 동네에서 뒤네 그 잡지 뱅고네로 제네로 시작이 된대비 강에 채팅이지 이제 지통에 지나서 뒤도 뒤바다 동네에서 잡을는지 렌지대다 쳐봐신스 렘부치기 때지 세기 때려지 라수는 이 시부 가족이 그러다 나는 들었지 세기 때려지 가족 시부지 디 렌지대다 쳐봐신 Небракаве чебасу. Небракавес. Тинжети, та небракаврис. Тати рембучетерти расуне рембучетерти карсубри. 체디기 디기를 집중 투게 시다 가조 지다 제 매비 다 딘데기 강내 체대니 아니 심제디 체수는 델레지 아니 가르치게 랑기 찍지 투나 아니 제 지메디기 지맹만도 그봐 타바드 탐제기 맺고 어두수 떼어지게로 떼어지게서 녀버까지 제버스는 다디 신도는 녀버까지 다 가제 텔레메 베니지 지게스는 인지는 인지 탈투 버리지 서바이는 서바 탈투 버리지 란줄에 녀인지를 지 로지야르지 당냠탑에 이것을 로지야지 인구리 두스 지단 야지 란초의 신초세스 진에 란초를 지수네 안디 지지게로 디는 추남다지 두기 네버바 란초의 신초 니수네 란초를 지수네 안두스네 자 차바드 되는 지게로 다 단대 딘데 디지 라신님바 니 디야 둥에다 디버 참이기 레사 아니 제네로서 버틴데 딘데 지간이 체들지 지그랑지 템버지 두트는 다디 시부지 그래서 솔라부지 서비에 그래서 내 강의 치쇼지래 펜디도 두개로 그 라싱에 바이서 미간글로 돌기야리 미간글로 지 카단스지다 돌서지리게 지 참이라지 제외는 간글로 참이지 간글로 돌 아니지 내 버럽지나 간글로 돈 이야지니 양 어떻게 딘데질이 지 지기는 다 소이자 좀 무서리 다까지 어디서 다 전주 선반남 기티르와 전주 선반 나랑도 지기 뭐는 충전의 제국이었다 아니 어디인지 나도 다 디데 쳐서나 이미지를 봐. 그걸 다리 디데지 거기 지지 그 이제 그 강게지 이지레스 그걸 디데지 그거에서 가고 그걸 하다는 줄 다 전주 선배는 아니 디데 내요 이거지 저도 술에 저 하바도야 저 유리지니 딘데 지체인도 전주 선배가 가디 시부지 게야다 딘데 이버봐 등은도 됐다는 뜻 말자서 또 수면은 천재는 갸고야
We go to the fourth verse, and the fourth verse reads, I will learn to cherish beings of bad nature and those pressed by strong sins and sufferings, as if I had found a precious treasure very difficult to find. So this is basically again mind training in the form of aspirational prayer. So here it says, like, whenever we want to come across with beings of bad nature, bad nature means like having negative personality and so forth, and those pressed by strong sins. And strong sins here refers to practitioners who have actually, not practitioners, individuals who have committed what we call as like heinous crimes or negative actions, or killing one's parents and so forth, right? And then and those also pressed by strong sufferings. And strong sufferings here refer to those who actually suffer from leprosy, and other contagious diseases, so that such individuals will be shunned by other beings or the society. So whenever we come across with these individuals, by their very nature, they are individuals that are, shunned by society, deserted by the society for various reasons. And when we come across with these individuals, we should actually treat them as if we have come across with a precious treasure. Like as we when we find a treasure of gold or treasure of some precious stone, that kind of amount of happiness that is going to give us, we should actually consider, we should actually also should be able to treat or give rise to a similar sense of contentment and joy when you come across with beings who have bad nature, who have committed heinous negative actions, who are suffering from leprosy and other contagious diseases and so forth. And the reason for that is simply because it is when we come across with such individuals, and when we engage in then compassionate practice, then these individuals give us the joy of high rebirth and liberation in the next lifetime. And also it is the case that when we engage in practice of compassion and service to these individuals, then it really becomes genuine compassion, and then it really becomes genuine patience. The patience that is involved in helping them, and that patience becomes genuine or authentic or ultimate patience. So it is ultimate compassion and ultimate patience. We usually tend to have a kind of compassion when one's own family members or relatives suffer. Then we do have the capacity to engage in some sort of help and empathize and so forth. But that is tainted with attachment, with discrimination, of dividing beings into one, those that are related to oneself and those that are not. So therefore, in that kind of practice, even though it's a kind of wholesome practice, it is not really a genuine, authentic Dharma practice. So therefore, when we come across with these occasions, then they give rise to a situation where we can engage in actual, authentic Dharma practice, and they give us an opportunity to actually engage in extreme accumulation of merit. As I mentioned earlier, the reason for that is because why they give us an opportunity or occasion where extensive accumulation of merit is possible is because all of these individuals are actually shunned by others. With respect to beings who have bad nature or negative personality, it is really the kind of nature of other beings to actually avoid such person, to shun such person. And when we come across people who have actually engaged in heinous negative activities of killing one's parents and so forth, also the society shuns such individuals. Then when we come across with sick people, leprosy and other contagious diseases, then the society also shuns these people as well. So therefore, the bodhisattvas, when they come across with such individuals, it gives them tremendous joy, as if they have found some precious jewel. In fact, more than that, because if we find some sort of treasure of gold or something, it is limited in giving rise to benefit only in this lifetime. But when we come across with these individuals, then the benefit that we're going to accrue from these individuals is not just limited to this lifetime, but ultimately to future lifetimes, including one's own liberation, higher rebirths, and ultimately the state of enlightenment. So therefore, even though this is really the case with bodhisattva practice, even if and something that we may not be able to do right now, it should be our part of our training, that our training in bodhicitta and training in bodhisattva activities, that we should, even though we may not be actually practically do so, we should at least be able to make aspirational prayers, to empathize and to make aspirational prayers that one may actually be able to do so sometime. And this is also powerful enough, because usually, the opposite is the case. When we actually come across with individuals who are very negative, and then we see they suffer, we actually cultivate a sense of inner satisfaction. We say, oh, that such person deserves it, and such person deserve that. So instead of actually cultivating empathy and compassion, we generate the opposite. We generate satisfaction. We generate some sort of inner kind of joy. So therefore, at least we should make sure that shouldn't happen, and that even at least we should be able to actually engage in aspirational prayer. That we should be able to help such individuals.
Tene tar chike nga ba ti. Kala ta gi pen da be rewa chewa nga shi. Shindo mirin me che na shinge kan ba ta wo se chikris.
Now we go to the 5th verse, where it says, "When others out of jealousy treat me badly with abuse, slander, and so on, I will learn to take all loss and offer the victory to them."
Ta le shinge ta do shiguru na so miribe. Yonga rangi lemba te kenga shana kwa shi singa ba te is.
So the 5th verse, when others out of jealousy treat me badly with abuse, slander, and so on, I will learn to take all loss and offer the victory to others.
Oh, ta la shinge ta do gi shiguru sere shewa ta kurwa te bas. Ta shewa se to ko ti che ti. Ko to ji ngale jeni chi khata ya cherba. Kurwa se ti tangmas. Kurwa ti ge. Ngas ta ji kurwa se ti ta ji. Main bala yin barabchi. Maje bala che barabchi che. Ani che ti che suna ta kurwa se ge ta kyun gi chane. Kyun di maje bala ti che sun se ti kurwa ta se. Chesa shewa ta kurwa so miribe yonga rangi lemba ta. Tine cheba ti chane ni yonga rangi lemba ta kyaga shenla piwa shos. Ani chi Delia Tausera bichi mache biche Yonga rangi li kyaga shenla piwa shos. Dati chenju sembagi nanda ti tirba. Ti temba ine da, temba mene da, tause mache biche. Ani inge magare lama chile tati pime chigi ta bugu chike ti kirang bugu kirang tabu jabshis ti sha no ti chite ni tagarang sunde nyate bingre no ta tusu tina shiche ti pata se mache bichi yongarang lemba kyaga shana purashus no ta direk surjire no ti direk chite.
So then the 5th verse says that when others out of jealousy treat me badly with abuse and slander. So Tibetan like Shekuru, and actually in Tibetan slander comes first, and she has the connotation of actually talking badly in somebody's back, and Kuru is abuse directly, to engage in direct abuse. And talking badly in somebody's back, and even when we come across with such individuals, then the Bodhisattva way is to take such blames and take all such loss upon oneself, and still offer the victory to others, even though one is not at fault. And the Bodhisattva way is not to seek some sort of justification. Like if you seek justification, then there is no forgiveness. Then say, okay, this is wrong. Like I didn't do that. But without seeking such justification, one should train so as to give all victory to others, and to take defeat or loss upon oneself. And which is that this reminds him of this story that one time. These women, out of jealousy and out of hatred, wanted to cause some sort of disrepute to a Lama. So during a teaching session, these women came with a child, and then she said, here, this is your child, take care of it, and put the child on the Lama's lap. and it is that Lama just continued teaching by holding the child on the lap, didn't like fight back by saying this is not true and things like that.
用这一些见这个是长松说吧马尾那么大打了民意决定全得讲是打了民意决定打全得讲是不都是为马心差不多这位偏多你不休息打不都是为马心都是不都不是为马的打그래서 그래. 강의 시기 체들이 봐. 딱 간지. 아니 다 제사 다라 민이 주지 최대장 부도시의 마신 하버도 델레제 펜도 누버쇼스. 델레야 아니 제외 번에 펜도 누버쇼스. 제사 부도시의 마신 하버도 델레제 펜도 누버쇼스. 아니 부도버시의 마디다 지 강의 시지 체대로 봐. 디사 디나 신제네. 딘다에 강사들 제외 권이 펜도 지누버쇼스. 종가란 게 님바티 제가신의 표시오스야디. 디신
So in this context of training to learn to take defeat upon oneself and offer victory to others, another great master, Kajin Genzen, wrote a verse where it says that just like the sages or the rishis of the past who actually practice the austere practice of patience, just like that, when others actually abuse me or inflict me with weapons and so forth, that may I actually be able to further intensify my compassion towards them, and may I be able to actually further benefit them even more. Very much like, like a mother who has lost her son. The kind of intensive compassion or feeling that such a mother would have. Kajin Shingenzen prays that may I be able to generate such intensity of compassion and be able to help others, even though they actually inflict me harm and cause disrepute and so forth.
부도시의 마디 부들을 저와시지야 봐. 디는 신스기 있어. 다디 라니게 가사라니기 부도시의 마신도 저의 용을 쇼스기 다디 부도시의 마디 불러 저와시지야 부도바디 부도바스도 부신도 제바지 시버봐. 다디 대 부들을 저와시지야 봐. 대신도 아니 이제 라한로 투징이 신제들라. 아니 제 디카레스 제외 펜도 지내쇼스. 부두시에 마디기 저와나 신지 저와 전 저와 디군이 니틀란 콜 펜도 지내쇼스. 답 never 집에는 들 펜다 봐. 제외군이 펜다 봐. 다는 쇼스.
So the analogy of a mother who has lost her very dear son or daughter is used here because the intensity of the feeling or loving of love of such a mother towards her dear lost son or daughter is extremely great or intense, right? So like that, Kajiki Genzi prays or asks us to train our mind so that when it towards people who inflict harm upon oneself, that we should be able to actually generate the intensity of compassion to such a degree similar to the level of intensity of compassion a mother would have towards her very dear son who passed away. And out of that intensity of compassion, then may one be able to benefit of help beings who actually inflict harm upon oneself. So this is basically responding with extreme kindness and compassion towards negative actions or harm inflicted upon oneself by other sentient beings. So this really comes within the context of the fifth verse of how one should actually offer victory to others and lose defeat upon oneself.
Indeed, tante diye cha chugu yusari ta cheram bachigi tala di tala luyu dang so dang longju la yudu zile samba dang di tala mingi juba dedala tani lapana mashi changyur ji tagi deda rinbu mi tobe tabe shinji kumbi chanju sim lasam taba yulin yinzi 기전 남의 전주를 때려 쇼스다 다기 류다 롱주다 아니 다기 류다 롱주 다기 류다 소다 롱주라스 윤도 제외 삼바탄디 달라미니 제바테달라 다니 라바마시 장교지 다기 대다리 부분 담시 라메 전주고 간다고 쇼스 어디 순간에 시전이 다 제산 너네들아 너가 매체바 너네 매체바 너네 핀베 제바 쇼스 중계 단도르드나 제대로 붙이게 된다 순도가.
Along the same lines with respect to this fifth verse of responding with utter compassion and loving kindness towards those who actually inflict harm upon oneself. Again, the great Dharma King Tsongkhapa wrote a verse where he says that towards those who actually who continuously intend to harm my body, my wealth, and my life force, and who intend continuously to cause disrepute upon me, may I be able to generate a superior compassion towards such individuals and then lead them to the state of enlightenment. So this is basically a prayer by Tsongkhapa, which comes within the same context of this particular mind training of accepting defeat upon oneself and offering victory to others, even when they actually harm oneself.
kāla tāgi pēn tāpe rewa chewa gāshīgi shindu mīri nūchi na shīngi tāmba tāwa shūs tā tāgi shiānda pēn tāpe rewa chewa gāshīgi āna tāgi sūsūgi nyēla pēntō kāyōng jīru chi jē shaba chi jē tī jēba pēntō jēba māngi nē yā chigi kū ngāla pēntō chigiri samsāgi pē sāmba yuñi kāsā chigi rāngla shindu mīri nūchenas chigi rāngi samchū te tāng mītūmba chēni pē rāngi rāwa chēya te māchūmba pē nūba shirachi chēya sūnās shindu mīri nūchena shingi tāmba tāwara shūs ane rāngi pē chamni jīgi shingi tāmba rangi onesh seba gomjigi shingi tamba 가르스는 자민인지 신이 담바를 붙다고 쇼스 가르스는 이제 가르스 그래 어디 엘레 진리지
60th verse says, when one whom I have benefited with great hope unreasonably hurts me very badly, I will learn to view that person as an excellent spiritual guide. So the context is like somebody who you have benefited and you had so much expectation and hope that that person is going to return your benefits. Or it can also be the case that even you haven't benefited somebody, but you still generate some sort of expectation or have some expectation that that individual is going to be of help to you, and then when it didn't turn like that, and the opposite happens, that that individual harms oneself, then the lesson to be taken from this context is, in the form of praise, is I will learn to view that person within this context as an excellent spiritual guide, as an excellent spiritual teacher. So the teacher here is teacher of loving kindness, teacher of compassion, teacher of patience.
신이 담바를 좀 맞다지 너네 지기는 그런 그래서 우리 신도 메리네 지나서 내 제반나 신기 텔레파지 콘루제 너네 제반이나 라마롱아 지기여 봐. 마롱아제 라냐원주야 레서기여 봐. 다텔레야 편바지 자민인지 공부이나 잠인지 공부에는 라치 딜레 디기 인구에 심 안에 치치만에 치마지고 산지주고 완투지기 손은 표순서가 시작이 여러 봐. 근데 개친비시 책이 여러 봐. 너네 제베이나 그 마rum바 임반나 시라니에 마rum바 차도. 딜레야 그 네버 제베들 란디 너네 제베이나 코치버레 줘 봐. 마세 내내 제바에서는 아니 건조군에 내내 제바에는 랑게 개존 좀이야 치망엔도 내 손디기야기 쿠서기야리 딜레 잠바더니 지르지 공부이나 체지랑 생태와 내가 잠바더니 지르지 공부이나 sem 최시지인 거 semna tiki tun tukuri. Ani tete teni sonam ka tsopa tu me bachi sagiyari. Tele tene ni chime ngondo ni sanji jukuwa pargi. Jebu tata tili yungu yarba. O tingi sa ani shingi tamba tawa shos. Jamngin ji kuwa pu shingi tamba. Soba kumiyagi. Soba kumis kuwa po chingi shingi tambara ta jamni ji kumis kuwa chingi shingi rabachi kuwa chingi rabachi tagi ni shingi tamba tawa shu tagi yarba teche na rana ti lavya ti lav tsarba kugi neba che tsar tipa saya ke yamarba 지 고도 시에베네다 신도 메르베네 바치 제번 제철이 다디 랜들 파지 제베나 아니 콘도 랜들 콘도 제베나 아니 콘도 기메 바치 동네 기메 바치 콜로코 쿠비여바 다디도 너네 맞제 바치 콘도 제 맞제 바 너네 맞제 베나 디 잠민지 지금 베나 아티네 그 semna hiti 준 tukuri 아니 천디디기 semna 디기 나 진짜 침 편적이 디기 표순 소요 저거야 다선 빠지면 시작을 봐 어디에서 어디 다디 디제베나 다시 담부터 그다음 디디리다 Dinde nene chebe ina gyong chimbu chira giyara randa. Nene ma chebe ina rani ke chimbu chira giyara ba. Ote tiri kanche.
So instead of learning that person who harmed oneself despite one's expectation, instead of seeing that person as one's spiritual teacher, if one responds negatively with negative thoughts and negative actions, then that activity, that kind of response destroys oneself. That negative actions and negative thoughts can give rise to rebirth within hell realm, and instead of that, if we practice patience and practice loving kindness and use this particular occasion or context to train in loving kindness and to train in the practice of patience, then not only one will achieve immediately a state of mental happiness and contentment and joy in this very lifetime, in that very moment, but also indirectly that same way of responding with compassion and loving kindness and patience become a causal factor of one's own state of enlightenment. But instead of doing that, if one react with negative actions and negative emotions, it not only destroys oneself, but it also destroys the other person as well. It destroys oneself because not only that disrupts one's momentary mental happiness, but also negative actions and negative emotions become a causal factor for rebirth in lower realms. And so therefore, when one reacts with loving kindness, compassion, then it gives rise to great accumulation of merit, and indirectly, then that same response actually become a causal factor for one's rebirth in higher realms, and gradually the state of liberation and the complete state of enlightenment. So therefore, we should actually see such occasion and such individual as a teacher or instructor, a teacher who teaches us, or instructing us, or reminding us to practice loving kindness, compassion. So when such person in whom we have a lot of expectation hurts us badly, then we should actually see that person as the teacher who actually reminds us, or who instructs us to train in the practice of loving kindness, compassion. The teacher who actually instructs us and reminds us to train in the practice of patience and forgiveness. And the fact is that the harm that we have received from that individual cannot be undone by reacting towards that individual with the same amount of negativity emotionally and in action. And in fact, when we do so, when we react negatively and with negative actions to a negative done upon oneself, that turns the wheel of vicious circle of suffering. So therefore, that's this is the reason why actually we should see that occasion in this light, and see that person as a teacher of one's loving kindness, teacher of one's practice of loving kindness, and teacher of practice of forgiveness and patience.
Sangye chan karasabure shinye tambara chitane kuba chigina rangi nene chinye telete jamji kuwa koki shinye tambara chigi tinde chitane kuba chigina ane dati shiragi yaburis chena sangye chansen tamje kyang dela tunis ti chene nene majebe che jamji gibe kuwa pe shinye tambara 딱이나 상계 장세 탐제 딜 투니 그리스 란드 주 개발량 델레서리스 다 란드 주 개발 디체나 아니 너네 제베는 란드 쇼를 갖다 치디디기 쇼두게레 치메디기 쇼두게레 란드 안에 둘레 개발량 델레시그리스 셈젤레 펜토바양 덴더시르시그리스 다 제사 딘데 지제와는 아니 선질 펜토바스는 딘데 다 준주래 tinge sungbi tingi 대신 시베 년제 인스 년제 니버진 란데 양다 두라야 tingi도 제대 등에 서완 tingi데 다다라 다기다 tingiчас 어때져서 두신 시베가 투인이 지스네 디리스 란데 두지스네 디리스 생기 등에서 지스네 디리스 다 딘리 지고 지게도나 디리스 다 딘리 다 그거지야 디신 디치는 그거지나.
So then, if we are able to respect others in such a situation, and respect by actually seeing that person who harmed us as one's teacher, and therefore we are able to respect such person in this way, in such a context, then Shantideva says in his Bodhisattva way of life, then nothing is better than that in terms of one's action, because then that is the way in which one actually is able to please all Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. That is also the best way in which one can say that one is able to accomplish or fulfill one's own enlightened self-interest. Because if you actually respond with negative actions, then you lose one's self-interest. Because we not only lose momentary mental happiness, but also karmically, these are causal factors that give rise to rebirth within lower realms. And also that is the way in which one can actually say that one is able to benefit other sentient beings. So therefore, Shantideva says, this way of behaving or responding to negative actions with reverence and respect, by seeing that individual as the teacher, is the best way in which one basically fulfills one's own selfish purpose, enlightened selfish purpose, and fulfills the purpose of other sentient beings, and also the best way in which one is actually able to please enlightened beings and bodhisattvas.
That Timbati Donna Gyubai Pendimana Mayin Tunita Sanita shows that the Donna said Kongi Chiche Timbati 20 Dortuna. Mother Gyubais, Takanje, Dortuna, Chita, Dortuna, Mother Gyubai, Pendiman Papi, my doing the Tunita, Side Dollar shoes, that Nicaragua, Rangi, Pendigangalo, Nusu, Pendo General to Nusu Pendo Chia, Nusu Pendo Gemini to Unicia, Pen, Nota Gubai, Pendimana Plus. My Nota to Neta, Saneta Lembash, my Neta, Sinjes Rangi Ma, Sinjes Neta Rangi Ma, Novata to Netam, Saneta Lembashus. Ni Saneta Lembashu said Tichida Dashi Yam says Karistashi chose Saneta Lembashu Dashi Yam just yet Tichida Rangi Teki Shanata and the Shengi to Rangi. Someone said Chanju Semba. Only the Meshuchi, Chanju Simba, only the Meshuchi Masumba. Dashi Yamji, Chanju Simkiat. Sanya di Chanju Simba, only the Sang. Just a Sanya Talan Pashu, Sama said. What is a Sanya Talas? Sanya Tala Lembashus, that. Rangi my Nota to Netanja Rangachu Rangi dig it dog Pindita. Dig it Tanji Shana Taya. What that is Donna Chija to give it 20 Torah did late year. What in Satan Donna said.
So then we go to the 7th verse where it says, "In short, I will learn to offer to everyone without exception all help and happiness, directly and indirectly, and respectfully take upon myself all harm and suffering of my mothers." So here the reason why it says "in short" is because this is the essential way of combining or incorporating all the practices that were mentioned in the earlier verses up to verse number 6. If we were to, the way in which we can incorporate the practices that are contained in all the 6 early verses is basically in this very 7th verse, this very verse itself. That's why it says "in short." And in short, that basically all of this practice involves offering without exception one's happiness and health, directly and indirectly. Directly basically means, in those cases where we are able to directly impact something or directly help somebody, then we do so directly. And if we're not able to do it directly, then we find mechanisms to do it indirectly. So that's what it means here. And respectfully take upon myself all harm and suffering of my mothers. And in the Tibetan version, which is not actually in the English version here, it says and respectively take upon myself secretly or in secret all harm and suffering of my mothers. So Sangwe means basically in secret, in secret or secretly may I be able to take upon myself the harm and suffering of my mother sentient beings. And the reason why it is mentioned like that, in secret or secretly, is because this practice basically is of the 2 types of practice of bodhicitta or training bodhicitta. This is the exchanging oneself with others, bodhicitta practice, which is actually taught secretly to bodhisattvas of higher mental capacity or higher mental intelligence. So secretly that actually involves or implies hiding it from some practitioners. And these actually teachings of generating bodhicitta through the method of exchanging oneself with others is actually not revealed to the bodhisattvas of lower mental capacity, bodhisattvas of lower mental intelligence. And so that's why it becomes secret. So in secretly means it's secretly to bodhisattvas of higher intelligence or bodhisattvas of higher mental scope. So to those, this method of generating bodhicitta or through exchanging oneself with others is taught.
Lama chivena yodri rangi jinji kubakun manam jinji yunde kunshis dichiri dashi chive nenjola nyamnengin bu chiva jingilos jasa dandapado jigi kubatan je yunayati mendebe kubak na choba ji yunayati ranche banji jimbala teni chungaris dando ranche brasune shen yawratona ni Gubale Taya Meva Chichagirba. Insata Tanda Ranzuruchi Gubat Natubati Medubetuni Paduneva Chunati Tanda Patu Chunati Tanda Patu Raja Basun Shen Yaurutavati Rishas Tachesa Yaran Yaurutoni Shen Jebazime Tinamne Begudus Girta Rani jinji kuba kungi kurus. Manam jinji yunde kungi shis. Ani manam jebanda meloti, shen jebanda meloti pe yunde tangi shitari shas. Insa dashin yam jinji bachimi kurus. Rani jinji dijir dashin jebes. Dashin jebe nenjola. Nyamni nyubu jeba shumus. Di nashi tande di donangwe de gyuba yi pende manam kungi pere. 마이는 뜻에 선에 따르는 것이었어. 다시 냠지군에 전주부 샘된도 지켜봐 쉬었으겠다.
This is also conveyed by a verse in Guru Puja, Lama Chöpa, where the verse goes by Panji Losang Chögyen, which goes something like that. That self-cherishing is basically the root of all suffering and obstacles and downfall, whereas cherishing of others is the root of all qualities or all virtue and qualities. And since this is the case, may I be able to actually treat as my essential practice the yoga of exchanging oneself with others. So that verse falls within the same context as this verse number 1, verse number 7. But basically by identifying cherishing of oneself as the root cause of all one's downfall and suffering. That the reason why we have suffered so far is because of self-cherishing. The reason why we will suffer in the future is also because of self-cherishing. And the way in which we turn this around is basically by engaging in the cherishing of other sentient beings, which then is the root of all happiness, the root of all realizations and higher qualities. So that's why in Namachaba, in Guru Puja, Benjiro Sanchoi Genzen prays that may he be able to actually treat the practice of exchanging oneself with others, the yoga of exchanging oneself with others, as his heart practice or essential practice. And here in this verse number 7, Langu Thangpa basically prays that because of that, may he be able to offer happiness and well-being to all sentient beings without exception, directly and indirectly, and then take upon himself or myself all harm and suffering of other sentient beings.
대다 군장 최계기 도백지면 하는 주위 주마시베 셰미 청원에 주시오스 다 대다 군장 스콘도 셰베 대다 군장 냠네도 군장 아니 최계기 도백지면 하시스 지대 최계세제 대다빈티니 대화주나가 동네주나니까 니에바 주나가 니에바 마주나니까 님부르지 자님부르지 되버지 주나 되나 감면나 내가 아니 지 어디에서 되매지자 추게 보스다 추게 지대 추게 세대들이 지대 추게 세대 되매니제 되나가 메나메가 가메가 니제 되매니제 가아리 메가와다 가와스 니에바다 미니바니 니에바다 미니바니스 아이 니에바세티 란지 주엔 중네지 가바제 니바라 마주나 메가바세티 니에바세티 지 담님부터서는 가바제 담맹님부터서는 메가바제 아티스 지는 지대 추게 온스는데 근데 대화 주는가 메테바라 주는 메가바제 대담이지 안에 지 대바진이 주는가 내려반이 주는 메가바제는 되매지 전이 지대 주게 제가 또 주게기 또 배지면 많이 신스 아니 주기 중나시베 셰미 청원에 주시옵소 다든데 공도 셰베 냥내 두수 간가로 아니 쓰는 거 저거 뒤버렸지 두두 간가로 아니 돈이도 비시럽 이시기 초기 맞습니다 아니 그걸 저투야 말이 그래서는 그래 저 단지 인연부터 네 돈이도 비시럽 되면은 아니 쓰는 저 장박이 퀄리티 저투네 어째서 셰메 청원에 주시오 그의 청원에 줘 그의 청원 님은 청원에 줘 님은 청원 님은 여자시단 디나네 탈도 버티 님은 탐지기 자와디 단지 단지를 주마도는 그의 청원에 줘 제사 셰메 청원에 주시오.
So then verse number 8, the final verse says, I will learn to keep all these practices undefiled by the strains of the 8 worldly conceptions, and by understanding all phenomena as like illusions, be released from the bondage of attachment. So therefore, what the verse number 8 says is that the way in which one engages in all of these practices is to do so by avoiding expectations in the form of 8 worldly concerns, or so that it is so such practices not contaminated by or strained by what we call as the 8 worldly concerns or conceptions. And the 8 worldly concerns are to react with kind of happiness or acceptance when one experiences some sort of happiness, and then to react with aversion when one comes across with suffering. So that's one way of engaging in worldly concerns. Two ways. Then the next set is to react with pleasure when one receives praise, and to react with kind of aversion when one gets defamed, or one is kind of spoken ill of. Then the third set is when one receives something in back, then one kind of cultivates some sort of happiness, and one does not receive something in back, and then one reacts with again aversion or negatively. Then the fourth set is basically that when one hears something pleasant to oneself, then one reacts with happiness or craving, and when one hears something unpleasant, something negative about oneself, then one reacts with aversion or negatively. So when one kind of engages in all of these practice tainted by these 8 worldly concerns, then one is making a fundamental mistake in terms of not actually doing so with the right view, and so therefore so far all the practices that are mentioned up to the verse number 7 are what we call as aspect of method or aspect of accumulation of merit. And so these practices pertaining to accumulation of merit has to be reinforced by or influenced by the wisdom that realizes emptiness, which is basically what we call as accumulation of wisdom. And so we talk about the union of method and wisdom, to ultimately give rise to the enlightened state. So therefore, these practices that belong to what we call as the method side, which basically accumulation of wholesome actions, has to be influenced by, when we engage in these activities, it has to be influenced by the understanding of the wisdom of emptiness or selflessness. And the reason for that is as long as these practices are not actually influenced by understanding of emptiness or selflessness, one never gains freedom from the bondage of samsara. Because when we talk about the bondage of samsara, simply through wholesome activities or wholesome positive virtuous actions, one is not able to gain freedom from samsara. Because when we talk about the bondage of samsara, samsara really refers to the bondage of the 3 root poisons, the bondage that is bondage of aversion, craving, and ignorance. And ultimately, the ultimate ignorance is the ignorance of self-grasping. So long as we're not able to destroy self-grasping, when we will never be able to actually gain freedom from the bondage of samsara, because self-grasping is basically the root of samsara conditioning. And so the only way in which we can actually destroy or uproot this root of samsara is through the wisdom of emptiness, through the wisdom of selflessness. So therefore, all of our earlier practices belonging to the method side has to be influenced by the wisdom realizing emptiness.
디가는 동네지 강에지 체인도 네 로디 디초스네 동네 코란지 검제 대베나 로디 강을 공부지네 디아 페르야디 추니 디 강에디 검제 되네 디 강에 디아 페르 semleya kange chirubya mishime kange gajet chene ji di sangbu chore ji dangi loj kungi ne kange lula kange chene ne semle kange chene na semle shidiya ne lula kange chene shiranu nduga di karesina tadi nang 주치다 누가지 샘디 드네 샘 shum바기 강에서 두야 말봐 강에지 태인데 샘 shum나 강에지 세트네 그거 가르치 그래 강에들에 샘들에 강에 마테르치 shum베테 버메스 가르스 강에 메시지 버봐 그래서 다니 근데잖아 디네 다데 동네 탐무들이 배수세 맞지버지 아니 디제베이나 아니 마음반의 강에 디베 치워지 책이여라 다데 동네 탐무들이 동네 지기나 마음반의 강에 친구들 동네 집 어디에서 답변나 동해 매나 니주메스 동해 매나 아니 니주고 삼바세디 기야메 다 동해 인도 잠바 니주고 삼바 푸 동해야 디 니주고 삼바기 도지 기야기 탑을 두두가 아니 교회 제가 세워지스 지라 랑 교화를 지키는데 나게 두수자 찬두에 교회 제가 세워지 동해지 인데 교회 지키기를 봐 되는 교회 제가 세워지 아니 라를 강에 지체인도 강에 전도 그러 지키는데 아니 샤는 지키야 인데 코아발은 지키 딜런 짐시 갤카스 다 강에 지가를 디베데부터 진바 하고네 다 강에 지면 되는 이거 사기야 말이스 근데 그 거네 아니 딜런지냐 아니 갤카스 아니 디발이 가르치래 동네 면도는 겨와 두고 여러 아니 겨와도 시야기 이마를 딱이 있는데 아니 강에들 동네 치도 버봐 아니 강에 동네 치스는 가르쳐 그랬다 다 전주 선박이 냠네 데려봐 강에 중수는 선제 탐지가 강에 탐지 이 외쳐서 쇼스만은 그래야 현재 대답을 강에 민주가 쇼스야 신기 강에 전쟁에 되고 쳐버렸어. 어딘지 추일래야. 많은 게 어딘지 연구해 봐. 어딘지 저는 초파도 없어. 아니 강에 되게 강에 디베트 되게 디베트 수상바르지. 나기 랭인 버치기 되고 다 두게 봐. 어딘지 저는 샘을 강에 튀게 막 샘을 강에 맞잖아. 류를 강에 튀게 총을 두게 pena ingutuga zemu jingi tusuge kuge lule pedwa mare tumi pe shibu shere de ku seme ya kure dari ku tambu yisab sare chiaro kule sere kage ya prata dinashi kure na tsa chiran seme kange me na o dinashi ngana dugita 지 강에 치체인데 심기 강에 동네 지고 심기 강에 동네 제나 르르 나자도 주네 나자도 중으로 거야 아니 심시디 중에 심시디 중스네 아니 데려봤더니 제사 강에 태인도 좀 봐. 동네 뭐무슨나 동네 패두비야리 강에 태도 좀 봐. 동네데 땅에도 지제서나 동네 충분히 봐. 어디 있어? 어디 시계 단다데 지대 주기는 동네 주는 내가 대화 주는 가 세트 지대 주기고 대화 주는 동네 주는 가와 공지 동네 집 중심 나기 랭이 대부세서 다 tinda기 마부치 상도야 또 같은데 땅스나 아니야 강에 시다체 투바 어디지
So, for example, one of the set of worldly concerns is to feel happy when one does not experience suffering and one experiences kind of joy and pleasure, and then to have no joy and to lose one's joy when one comes across with suffering. That is, that is the two ways of engaging in reacting with worldly concerns. So this is a negative way of doing this, because for bodhisattvas, the training is such that when one comes across with suffering, instead of actually giving rise to mental suffering, that physical suffering in turn is actually is able to induce mental joy. And when one does that, when in the phase of suffering, one does not actually lose one's mental stability, and one is able to still maintain mental joy in the face of suffering. Then through that practice, one is able to actually overcome physical suffering. And instead, if we react to suffering with further kind of lack of joy and further suffering, further mental suffering, then the very nature of suffering is that suffering tends to intensify and multiply. Whereas even in the face of physical suffering, if we are able to maintain the mental kind of sense of joy and contentment and happiness, then that physical suffering is not able to harm oneself that much. In fact, one's mental power has the capacity to even transform physical suffering into something joyful, something meaningful. And that's one reason. Secondly, if we become discouraged and depressed in the face of suffering, that does not help one to actually overcome suffering. That is not the way to overcome suffering. That does not actually harm oneself to overcome suffering. So that is something that we also have to keep in mind. And so therefore, the way to actually be able to even experience some sort of mental joy in the face of suffering is through engaging in mind training, where we actually are able to see the positive attributes of suffering, just as the bodhisattvas do. For example, it is said that without suffering, there is no possibility for generating renunciation. If you want to generate renunciation, suffering helps that. And then further, whenever there is suffering and sadness, it is able to actually reduce or destroy one's pride and ego. And further, that it is said that without suffering, one is incapable of generating compassion towards others. It is because of personal experience of suffering that one is able to then empathize with others, and based on that, one is able to actually generate compassion with others. And further, the benefits of suffering is such that it helps us to be careful of not engaging in negative actions, because of actually experiencing the consequences oneself, and also it helps us to be mindful with respect to engaging in wholesome activities, wholesome actions. And so therefore, once through this mind training, that even in the face of suffering, we are not able to lose the mental calmness and mental joy. Then that is and that is possible. And when that happens, then we are able to actually overcome physical suffering. So something that we can actually clearly see how this is possible through mind training is you look at even sports like boxing or kickboxing, where people go to extreme length of damaging or receiving injuries from sports, right? But nonetheless, there is no mental suffering, because that individual has actually gone into that sport with this mental conviction or mental training that says, this is not a real fight. This is a game. This is a sport, right? Simply through changing one's attitude, the way one experiences the physical, injury is totally different. So that's how it is possible through mind training. That it is possible to actually reduce the mental suffering and in fact even cultivate mental joy in the face of physical suffering, when we actually see that it is a way of engaging in Tonglen practice, giving and taking, a way of purifying one's karma, way of generating compassion and so forth.
Jeres,